let's talk a little bit about key issues in considering how to restore someone's nervous system who has experienced trauma. And Joshua, will you start us off, and then we'll head over to you, Ian?
Sure, that's great.
Okay. So, main considerations that we think about, and I think it's good that we're talking about healing from narcissistic abuse as a kind of trauma. We've inherited this idea of trauma from the psychiatric establishment, that trauma is a particularly severe event. To qualify as having post-traumatic stress disorder, you have to have had a precipitating event. There's the A criterion in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And that says that we have been exposed, we've had an exposure to something that involved actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violation. So you have to have had this incredibly severe event to be thought of as being traumatized. This is confusing for a lot of us who are trauma professionals, because we will regularly see people who have the other symptoms of post-traumatic stress that would meet those criteria to get the diagnosis, but not the precipitating event. Being through a psychologically torturous engagement with somebody who has these tendencies towards narcissism wouldn't necessarily, qualify one to be a trauma survivor. But we know that it can create ongoing, lasting nervous system dysregulation and a debilitating suite of symptoms. So in terms of restoring the nervous system, we're going to really look at a number of different aspects of how our bodies function. We have this whole part of our nervous system in our bodies that controls our different organs and glands, and then creates a certain kind of state for us. And if that nervous system is exposed to ongoing threat, danger, dissatisfaction, if there's accumulated stress, that system can break down in the same way that it does in response to extreme catastrophic events. So you might see, that there's a tendency to be in a lot of stress, to experience a lot of anxiety. That's when the sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system is always on, and we just live in this sense, something's wrong. We also, though, can have this other thing that happens where the parasympathetic, the inhibitory or calming branch of the nervous system, turns on too strong. And then people are in a kind of a depression, a sense of shutdown or collapse. So we're going to be looking to ease people out of that stuckness in those maladaptive patterns of response, where we're in fight, flight, or freeze more of the time than we would want to. Mm-hmm. So we're inviting the nervous system to come back into its more fluid, more flexible pattern of response, where we can be in the right state of arousal for what's happening in our current environment. Mm-hmm. Some of the things that we do, includes helping people to get oriented, to be able to be in the here and now, to bring your attention into the external environment, to not be quite so fascinated with our distressing thoughts, our painful emotions, and our uncomfortable sensations. We also will talk in SE about our sort of funny technical term is stabilizing the counter vortex, which is just being able to connect to positive experience, to recognize that for trauma survivors, there can be in the brain a negativity bias, where we overly focus on those things that bring us suffering and malaise. So we try to help people to, in their bodies, in their psyche, connect to those aspects of experience that might be more towards pleasure, more towards comfort, more towards ease. And though in our SE sessions, that's going to be undertaken in a particular way, supported by a practitioner. A lot of these things are will encourage people to bring into their daily lives and just begin to develop as habits of attention.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing about that. And it is very interesting how, experiencing trauma can, lead us to these symptoms of, overstimulation and overarousal, hyperactivity, that kind of stuff. And then also the flip side of that, of just this depressed kind of nervous system and experience. Ian, is there anything else you wanted to add to how we can help people restore their nervous system?
Well, I think there are various tools. Some of them Dr. Levine has on if you look at YouTubes, that can help a person not be immersed into the vortex, if you will, or the attraction to, as Joshua just said, of looking for what's wrong and the danger, and coming out of the limbic system more into your executive function. So, as one client said to me this week, we were just doing a bit of that, of just gently helping them find more comfort, and said, "Oh, I just feel like I can take a little bit of a step back and look at that accident. And I just feel a little bit more settled." And as Joshua said, you know, it isn't just, the technical PTSD definition. Accumulated stress over time just is sort of insidious, and you end up in a different state of being, but you don't, a lot of times you just had to cope through so many different things developmentally as a child or as an adult, or this sense of being with a person who's really quite, I would say, detached and narcissistic, and in their, quote, false self or adapted self. Yeah.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Ian. Hey, I want to pause you for just a second. Could you move your microphone a tiny bit down? It's like kind of in between. There we go. That'll be better. I think we'll be able to hear you better now that it's close to your mouth.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Sure.
So also, I know that you guys wanted to both talk about something called titration and pendulation. Can you get us started? Actually, Ian, could you keep going and just tell us what those two things are? How does that relate to this? And then we'll go to Joshua.
Well, I think, titration is one of the principles of SE, and Joshua talked to that, is that we're wanting to do very, very gentle, small places of helping a person just sense themselves in relationship to whatever the issue is that they came in with, that they're talking about. So, there's an incredible pull when somebody has had all this neural pathways in the brain that are in about the past experiences that have led them to feel slightly or greatly dysregulated. So if you try and just shift all that quickly, or too big of a step, the nervous system can't handle it. The nervous system integrates small little steps of being able to notice the sensation in the body, to notice the felt sense and their experience, and to be able to just gently, little bit by little bit, titrate. In other words, just taking little small steps, and each of those cumulative start to create a healing vortex, a healing pattern that starts to put the past in the past appropriately, and not intruding in the present so blaringly and viscerally, either whether there's a high activation that's evident or the shutdown. And even with the shutdown, you want to be very careful, because underneath it is usually a high activation from the sympathetic side. So I think that's really what I would say about titration, and Joshua may have something more to add there.
Well, titration was a term that Peter Levine borrowed from his laboratory experience. Peter is a double PhD in psychology, also has a PhD in medical biophysics. So he did a lot of work in the lab. And one of the things that titration describes is how sometimes in order to make a compound, you have to do that really slowly. if you take two elements that are dissimilar, maybe one is very acidic and one is very alkaline or very basic, and you just try to put them together, there's going to be an explosion. They're going to repel each other so vigorously that it just goes boom. So what people learned is that you have to do that very slowly. So if you put the very acidic element in a beaker and then the very alkaline element in another distributor beaker, and then you put it in one drop at a time, there'll be a reaction. That drop goes in, there's a tss, and then it settles. Another drop, tss, but then it can settle. And that also seems to describe the way that people can really heal from trauma, whether that's from extreme events, abuse patterns, accumulated stress. And this is one of our basic principles now. Peter said that in terms of trauma, less is more. We'll get farther faster by, as Ian said, taking these incremental steps than trying to go after the whole thing all at once.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the stepwise, right, titration kind of process. What about pendulation? What is that?